Yeah, so this is a 1931 Ford Model A. What I need to do to it is fix the oil leaks. Yeah, it's funny, it doesn't even have spark plug wires on this. And look, the fan only has 2 blades on it. And it's got one of those Oga horns on it. And it's funny, this lever on the steering wheel, what it does is retards the timing so you can start it. And I think the turn signals were added to it. And the gas tank is up above the carburetor, so it doesn't have to have a fuel pump. And it's still 6 volts. So I guess first thing I'm going to do is fix the rear main seal on it that leaks. Yeah, it's funny, the only gauges that it has inside are the amp gauge, the speedometer, and the gas gauge. The gas gauge is probably just a float that goes into the tank right there. But then look, it's got an oil pressure gauge screwed into the side of the block underneath the carburetor. And for the carburetor, it's a Zenith carburetor. Yeah, we definitely got a problem with this Model A engine. Let's see if I can see this on camera. But you see that, the timing gear on the camshaft? I don't know if you can see that on camera or not. It's got a big crack through it. And I would not have even noticed this if it hadn't been facing down. So what I'm going to do is pull the engine out of this and take it apart and fix this right. Yeah, these small jobs always seem to get bigger and bigger each time. And you see this? This is the actual oil pump. So the only way you're even going to be able to put this back together is to have this upside down on an engine stand and put the oil pump in there. And it just hits against the oil pan. That's what holds it in. Yeah, and you see this here? This is the actual temperature gauge. And here's the actual part where it goes into the coolant. You know, I never realized it, but the dash on this car is the gas tank. I had to go under there to get the 2 screws out for the hood. And the fuel line's right down there. Yeah, I got the floorboards out. Yeah, then you can get to everything real easy. It's still got that old 6-volt battery. Yeah, I don't know why somebody didn't upgrade that. Normally you never see those anymore. Yeah, and I also got the hood up. So the next thing I need to do is take this radiator out of here. But I've got to undo the wires for the headlights. I already undid them from the horn. And here's a starter out of it. It's got one of these goofy type starters in it. And then you push this is what cranks it over. So I pretty much got this apart. So I'm just about ready to pull the engine out. Yeah, you see this is how the brakes work. It's got this rod. Yeah, because they didn't know how to make hydraulic brakes back then. I think it was maybe another 7 or 8 years before they did that. Yeah, look at the goofy way somebody made these alternator brackets. And this is actually a GM alternator from like 63 up through the early 70s. And I guess it's been reworked inside where it only puts out 6 volts, and it's got this voltage regulator on it that's not like the original one. Yeah, I got the engine out. Yeah, now you can see that crack. And there's obviously something missing here that goes on the end of the spring. It rides up against the cam. So I'm going to have to look that up and figure out what's missing there. Yeah, I got the engine on an engine stand, and all the parts have been ordered. Yeah, it's funny to see this. It's got Babbitt bearings in it. It's also got square bolts in the main caps. Yeah, I just got some parts for the Model A. Got the aluminum timing gear instead of the fiber one that's on there. And I got a steel crank gear. It has an aluminum one on the crankshaft right now, and I think when you run the aluminum one on the cam, you're supposed to run a steel one on the crank. And here's that socket that takes the cam gear off. Yeah, I don't know why the customer ordered another nut for that, a regular one. And this is supposed to be the rear main seal. There is no actual seal. And I think that's for the thrust on it. Or no, that's the exhaust gasket. And here's that piece that goes in the timing chain cover that was missing. Yeah, and this goes behind the harmonic balancer. Keeps oil away from that wick seal. That was missing too. Yeah, what's funny about this engine is it's only 40 horsepower. Yeah, this socket took that nut off real easy. Yeah, it's hard to imagine this thing was driven to my house like this. It's cracked all the way around here. Yeah, I'm going to get to use these square sockets I bought like 30 years ago for the first time. And to get to these main bearing bolts, you do have to take the side cover off, because this bolt runs all the way through, and all of them do that. Yeah, here's the best way to get the crank gear off here. I just stuck a 1/2-inch bolt in here, because you can't use this thing where the crank starter goes to, and I'm using a posi lock puller. Yeah, and these engines normally did not have a rear main seal, and somebody shoved this in there that doesn't normally go in there, and it plugs up the oil return hole. That's probably why this thing leaked so much. Yeah, and the reason I pulled the crankshaft up like this is that piece goes back in here, so the only way to get that out of there is to do that. And you got to make sure all these shims go back in the right spots. And also you want to make sure these oil holes are clear. It's got 3 of them there. And also this oil return hole in the rear main bearing cap, it was plugged. Yeah, that piece of crap just came out of there. It's supposed to have a little pipe that's attached to here, which is missing. It sticks up a little ways, and that's where it drains back into the oil pan. Yeah, and here's what it looks like with the steel crank gear and the aluminum cam gear on here. And this nut gets torqued down to 100 foot-pounds. And here's where this washer goes. It helps to keep oil away from the seal. And the main bearing caps get torqued to 80 foot-pounds. I didn't take the connecting rods off. Yeah, and here's how the oil pump goes in here. It just sits in here, and it's pushed up against the oil pan, and that holds it on. Yeah, and this piece that goes up against the camshaft, it was in there the whole time. Somebody put this, here's the original one, it was in there backwards. So it's just a spring up against the camshaft. Yeah, I just put a blowgun on here and blew, and it blew right out of there. And this gasket set didn't come with the right front cover gasket. Yeah, this is definitely not right, so I'm going to have to make something because I don't want to wait any longer. Yeah, when you put the front cover on this engine, you want to put this pulley on first, or you'll never get it on with this wick seal. And then what we're going to do is cut this off to where it's flush with the head, with a razor blade. Yeah, I took a piece of 3/8 inch tubing and put it on the lathe and put 32 threads on it. and screwed it in here. That's the oil drain. The threads in this cast iron piece weren't the greatest, so I had a hard time getting that to go in there, but it works, because that piece was missing. Yeah, and when you clean the oil pan, you need to pull this piece out of here. It's not easy to pull this out, but it will come out of there. Just look at all that down there. I would never been able to clean that with this in here. Yeah, so I got the oil pan back on. So now I think I'm going to do something with these alternator brackets. This is a total joke the way somebody did that. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking when. I guess this person didn't know how to weld, or they would have made something better. And it didn't need to be two pieces like that. Yeah, and here's what I came up with the lower alternator bracket, and it goes down here so this doesn't move around. Now I just got to do something for the top, because before you could only move it a tiny little bit. And this lines up perfect with the crank pulley. It's off a little bit with the water pump. There's actually nothing I can do with the water pump here. Shit, and it hits there. I'm going to have to do something with that nut. Yeah, I think I'm going to take that nut off and turn a little bit off of it with a lathe on, and then it'll clear this fan. Before it was in, the whole alternator was in way too far. It didn't even line up with the lower pulley. Yeah, I took a little bit off of both ends of this nut so it fits in farther, and there was a washer behind here that didn't need to be here. It actually lines up better now with everything, and there's about a 1/4 inch between the fan. Yeah, so now I'm going to do something with this goofy upper bracket here. Yeah, here's what I came up with for the brace that goes on the top of the alternator. Now I just got to paint that. Yeah, and here's what that alternator bracket looks like when it's on there. Yeah, and that works much better than the way it was before. Yeah, it is funny to see how the distributor cap is on this. It's two separate pieces. Here's the other piece. Yeah, so now I'm going to take this off the engine stand and put the bell housing, flywheel, and clutch back on it. Yeah, and this strap is not actually around the carburetor, it's around the intake manifold. There's not very many places to pick this engine up at. And these straps I bought from a place online called Uline. And I have a couple of them. And when I put the bell housing and flywheel and stuff on there, I'm going to have to strap this somehow different because it doesn't hang straight. Yeah, and with the bell housing, there's also a gasket that goes back here, and that seals off where the cam goes. There's a plug still there, but I think it still seals it off better. And all these bolts have a hole in the head, and a piece of wire goes through there to keep it from coming loose on the inside ones, and the flywheel too. And the flywheel bolts get torqued down to 65 foot-pounds. And with the clutch, I don't have a clutch aligning tool, but I have this universal one that'll probably work. And it did have the right adapter for the center, so it'll work.